All right, week 6, the home stretch. We're almost done with the semester. Congratulations, you guys are doing great so far. Week 6, we talk about the Sulawesi, Indonesia earthquake. We'll cover the earthquake that occurred on September 28th, 2018, how the state of infrastructure can reduce or increase deaths, disasters in economically disparaged areas, and then also the draft research paper. This is where the place you hone in your grade of 100 for the final research paper. So let's go over the weekly overview. Upon completion of this week's assignments, you'll learn about the Sulawesi earthquake, how the state of infrastructure can reduce or increase deaths, and then also disasters in disparate areas. You'll complete a disaster response plan, discussions around disaster response in economically disparate areas, and a draft research paper. And on completion, you'll have an understanding of how infrastructure relates directly to positive or negative disaster response. So you'll have a few videos, you'll have a good amount of reading as well, and then the assignments that we'll go over now. So the first assignment, 6.1, disaster response plan. After reviewing the action plan or response plan from this week, think of how you would prioritize the response objectives and the funding for each objective based on the response plan. Every time in a disaster, funding and money is always the biggest question. So you're going to prioritize the 10 objectives stated below and in the document. You're going to give reasoning to why you prioritize them in the order you chose. And just like every other disaster in reality, the requested amount of funding needed for these priorities is $50.5 million. But you're only going to receive $35 million from different sources. How would you disperse the money throughout the objectives to accomplish as many of them as possible? So you see the objectives below, and they're also in the readings as well. Next, let's look at the discussions. So 6.1 is disasters in economically disparate areas. So you're going to think about why these locations like Sulawesi, Indonesia, are economically weak. An economically weak area has a harder time preparing, responding, and recovering from disasters than an economically stronger area. Remember, this isn't just about money. There are many other contributing factors and compounding factors when it comes to lack of economic resources for disaster response and preparedness. 6.2 is about communication with no infrastructure. Economically disparate areas often have very poor infrastructure. When it comes, part of infrastructure is communication as well. So you're going to do a little research here. You're going to look into different methods of communication that response agencies and organizations could use to better their communication with each other. This doesn't have to be all about infrastructure also. It can include standard operating procedures and guidelines and other standards of communication that are used as well. But think outside the box. Think about other ways that organizations, when they're in these areas responding, can communicate. The third one, communication planning. So in disasters like this one, where an earthquake causes a secondary disaster, a tsunami, the initial earthquake can destroy the communication lines too, and render the preparedness efforts like tsunami warning systems useless. You're going to identify in this scenario where there is a primary and secondary disaster where one impacts the other, how early warning systems can still be used and robust enough to withstand the initial disaster. So you're looking at a lot of bracing of systems and really building up infrastructure, how that can be done in economically disadvantaged areas. So this may include different types of early warning systems instead of more technologically advanced programs. I'll leave that up to you to decide, but you're going to want to identify and talk about a few ones that are more beneficial and more cost-effective than others. And lastly, the draft research paper. So the draft research paper is going to be done for week 6. This doesn't have to be a full paper, but what you're going to be doing here is really building out the outline you did in week 4. So you'll receive a lot of feedback from me from that outline, and that will shape how you write the rest of your paper. Week 6, this is used not as another test, but as a way to really strengthen your final paper. You'll use this to get 100 on your final. So Not that this is optional. This is a mandatory assignment, but you can put as much or as little effort into it as you want. As you send it in, I'll review it, I'll give you edits and critiques, and you'll use that for your final paper, which we'll go over for the next video for week 7. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask. All right? Have a good week.